I had thought it was merely a sign that a torrential rainstorm was approaching, never imagining that the sun would never rise again. My phone screen lit up as a message popped up from Michael, my brother. "I'm out of class. I'll come over tonight, haha," followed by a silly, toothy grinning emoji. It was Friday afternoon, and the office was filled with that relaxed air that comes with the weekend drawing near. I typed the last line, glanced at the time, and saw there were still 10 minutes before getting off work, so I replied with a simple, "Okay, welcome to Panda's storyboard. Put on your headphones, get cozy, and settle in. Let's enjoy this story together. If you like it, don't forget to subscribe and give the video a like. Now, let's begin." Then I remembered the fridge was almost empty, and since the forecast said there would be heavy rain all weekend, I figured I might as well go shopping tonight, so I could stay completely holed up at home over the weekend. After work, I drove home, the sky looking a little heavy, but with no rain falling. On a summer evening like this, it should still have been bright out, yet today, it seemed to grow dark earlier than usual. The gray-blue sky quickly faded into a deep, oppressive blue. Not the kind of rolling thunderclouds that press in before a storm, but something that descended unusually quietly and swiftly. I glanced at it and muttered to myself that it was getting dark really fast, then thought it was probably just a cloudy day, and didn't dwell on it. When I reached the entrance of the residential complex, I pulled over and called Mikhail, telling him I was there and that he should come straight to the gate so we could go to the supermarket together. Before long, I saw him jogging out of the complex with a backpack on, opening the car door and hopping in. The supermarket was brightly lit and fairly crowded, and I focused on choosing vegetables, fruit, rice, flour, oil, and daily necessities that would keep well, while Michael happily loaded the cart with chicks, biscuits, and all kinds of drinks. When we passed the bottled water promotion area, his eyes lit up, and he said bottled water was on sale, so we might as well grab a few cases, and just like that, 5 more cases of water went into the cart. After checking out, we stuffed the big and small bags along with the bottled water into the trunk and drove home. I carried 2 heavy bags of daily supplies and food, while he made 2 trips, huffing and puffing as he hauled the 5 cases of water upstairs. After putting everything down inside, I glanced at the clock on the wall and saw it was exactly 7 in the evening, then headed into the kitchen to start cooking. Out of habit, I looked out the window and saw that the sky was already completely dark, a dense inky black, with no starlight and no moon. And strangely enough, it wasn't raining at all, nor was there any sound of wind. At 7 in the evening during summer, it shouldn't have been this utterly dark. "What are you looking at, sis?" Michael asked as he came over after washing his hands, and followed my gaze outside. "Wow, it's dark, like it's the middle of the night," he exclaimed. "Yeah," I said, as I withdrew my gaze, the faint sense of unease in my heart dissipated by his interruption, deciding it was a bit strange, but brushing it off, and focusing on cooking, since I was starving. He rolled up his sleeves and offered to help, clumsily peeling garlic, and handing me things, while gossiping about school, and soon the kitchen was filled with the aroma of food and the casual chatter of siblings. Outside the window, that prematurely arrived and inexplicably heavy night was temporarily shut out by the warm light indoors. Before long, 2 dishes and a soup were ready, and just as Michael and I sat facing each other and picked up our chopsticks, the phone on the table began to buzz. The screen lit up with a video call from Mom, and I told Michael before answering it. Mom's smiling face immediately appeared on the screen, the familiar living room behind her brightly lit. "Lily, are you eating?" Her warm, familiar voice came through the speaker. "We are, Mom," I replied, panning the camera over the dishes and then toward Michael, telling her to look who was there. Michael leaned into the camera with a piece of meat still in his mouth and called out, "Mom," in a muffled, carefree voice, making her smile even wider. "Off to mooch meals at your sister's again," she said knowingly, her tone full of amusement. Dad's face soon squeezed into the frame as well, wearing his usual slightly stern expression, with a smile hidden in the corners of his eyes, as he reminded Michael not to just eat, but to help wash the dishes since I had worked all day and still cooked for him. Michael grinned and said he had helped peel garlic, lifting his chin proudly, earning a nod of approval from Dad. The phone rested on the table with the camera pointed at us, as Mom chatted on, asking about the weather and mentioning the forecast of heavy rain over the weekend, saying things were fine at home, just muggy. I glanced at the utterly still yet unusually dark night outside the window and replied that it hadn't rained yet, just that it was getting dark very early, and that we bought enough food to last several days, so we wouldn't go out over the weekend. Mom nodded in relief and reminded Michael to stay put at my place and not run around, to which he jokingly made a promise gesture that made both parents laugh. After a few more words of casual conversation and reminders to lock doors and windows and stay safe, the call ended, their side looking warm and normal, with even the faint sound of a TV news program in the background. A subtle contrast to the deathly still blackness outside our window. Once the screen went dark, only the soft clinking of dishes and the sound of chewing remained, while the darkness outside continued to silently engulf the world. With the lights warm and the food hot, and our parents' laughter still lingering in the air, that tiny doubt about the prematurely fallen night faded into the background, and we finished this ordinary, cozy Friday dinner, completely unaware of what was about to come. After the meal, Michael voluntarily cleared the table and went into the kitchen, the sound of running water and clattering dishes ringing out, while I curled up on the couch and idly scrolled through my social feed. Sure enough, there were already a few posts about the weather, including a colleague from the east side of the city who posted a photo of pitch-black darkness outside with the caption that it was only past 7 and so dark it felt like time travel, followed by comments agreeing that it was frighteningly dark and a bit eerie. Another friend posted that the sky was getting dark too early and that something felt off, making it clear I wasn't the only one who found it strange, as this large-scale, silent early nightfall was obviously beyond an ordinary cloudy day. I got up and went to the balcony, sliding open the glass door as heavy, humid air rushed at me. And outside was a complete, absolute darkness. Not the natural darkness of a city without light pollution, but something else entirely. The streetlights in the complex were on, yet they could only barely spread a small halo beneath each lamp, unable to pierce the darkness beyond. Normally, even after nightfall, the lights from nearby buildings and distant streets would cast a familiar yellowish glow on the sky. But now all I could see was an inky black, so thick it seemed impossible to dissolve. That unease rose again, but the exhaustion from a long day, the warm lights inside, and the sound of dishes being washed eventually won out, and I told myself it was probably just extreme weather, since the forecast did say there would be heavy rain. I closed the balcony door, shutting that unsettling darkness outside. I didn't sleep well that night, feeling as if something heavy was pressing down on me in my dreams, waking up several times to the same dead, silent blackness outside, so quiet that even the usual nighttime insects were gone. By a little past 5 in the morning, I was fully awake, still needing to turn on the lights to see, while the sound of light rain pattered steadily against the window. Yet despite the rain, the sky showed no sign of brightening. The darkness was identical to deep night, made even more oppressive by the rain, which was utterly abnormal for a summer morning, when even a storm should bring some dim gray light. My heart sank completely, and that self-deceiving excuse of extreme weather collapsed as a cold premonition crawled up my spine. I slipped on my slippers and hurried to Michael's room, knocked, then went straight in and turned on the light, startling him awake as he squinted and sat up with messy hair, asking groggily what time it was. I told him to look outside and pulled the curtain open, and as he adjusted to the light and peered out the window, the sleep drained from his face, replaced by confusion and growing shock. It was raining, yet the sky was still pitch black, and after checking the time on his phone and confirming it was just past 5, his voice took on the same doubt and unease I felt, as he said it made no sense, since even in heavy rain, summer mornings were never this dark. Standing together at the window, listening to the rain and staring at that night-like dawn, the unease we shared finally surfaced fully, impossible to ignore. We looked at each other, clearly seeing the uncertainty in each other's eyes, and decided to call our parents. Mikhail moved even faster than I did, grabbing his phone with slightly trembling fingers and dialing home, and when Mom finally answered, she appeared sleepy and disheveled in the dim bedroom light, with Dad rubbing his eyes beside her, asking what was wrong. I quickly reassured them and asked them to look outside to see how dark it was, and when Mom pulled back the curtain, her startled cry came through the phone as she called Dad over, unable to believe how dark it was, even though it was already past 5. Dad frowned deeply, saying it was darker than midnight, and though the video quality was limited, we could still see that the same suffocating darkness covered their side as well. I told them it was the same for us, and that something was clearly very wrong, since even heavy rain shouldn't make a summer morning this dark. And Mom nodded repeatedly, her face filled with worry, as she said she'd never seen anything like it. An unspoken anxiety spread through us across the screen, and I urged them not to go out today and to stay home until they saw how things developed, while they reminded us to be careful, keep doors and windows shut, and not go outside. After a few more hurried words, the call ended, and the room fell silent again, except for the soft patter of rain, making the darkness feel even more eerie. Michael broke the silence, saying in a low voice that it was too strange and that he felt uneasy, suggesting we take advantage of the light rain and the fact that not many people might have reacted yet, to make another quick run to the supermarket to stock up more, since staying home felt safest. I hesitated, knowing rationally that going out in such circumstances might not be wise, but seeing the sky outside showing no sign of lightning and the same unease in my brother's eyes, that instinct to secure more safety won out. After taking a deep breath, I made the decision, grabbed an umbrella, and told him we'd go quickly and come back. Minutes later, fully dressed and holding umbrellas, we stood at the door. And as I unlocked it, the corridor was eerily quiet, with only our footsteps and breathing echoing. When the elevator doors opened, a damp, cold gust rushed in, colder than anything I'd felt on the balcony. And though the lobby lights were bright, they still felt weak as the automatic glass doors slid open, and we truly stepped into that strange darkness. The rain wasn't heavy, pattering softly against the umbrellas, but what truly suffocated us was the darkness everywhere. Not the clear darkness of night with stars, moon, or distant lights, but a predatory, oppressive blackness that seemed to have weight, pressing down on us and swallowing all light. The streetlights in the complex struggled like feeble glimmers, casting dim yellow pools that reached only a few meters, beyond which lay a bottomless, ink-dark void. And just then, Mikhail's voice sounded beside me, carrying a trace of, there was a barely perceptible tremor, and the thought that it was far too dark rose up unbidden. He instinctively edged closer to me, and my heart leapt into my throat as well, but I forced myself to stay calm, telling myself not to scare myself, that it was probably just extreme weather, that the car was right ahead, and we should hurry. We quickened our pace, relying on memory and the faint light to make our way toward the parking spot, occasionally noticing scattered lights coming on in other buildings of the complex, with vague silhouettes moving at windows, as if other early risers who felt the same unease were also getting into their cars. When we closed the car door, it felt as though we were temporarily cut off from that unsettling world outside, and the interior light coming on brought a faint sense of safety. I fastened my seatbelt and started the engine, and the headlights flared on abruptly, two pale beams stabbing into the darkness ahead. I took a deep breath, tightened my grip on the steering wheel, and slowly drove the car out of the complex. The streets were empty, with almost no pedestrians or vehicles in sight, while the traffic lights continued to function normally, monotonously switching colors that looked especially jarring and lonely against the ink-black backdrop. Occasionally, a car would pass from the opposite direction, its headlights compressed into two blurred halos of light that crossed past us in an instant. The shops lining the road all had their metal shutters pulled down, not a single one open, and only the windshield wipers scraped rhythmically across the glass, clearing away the rain with a dull, repetitive sound. The supermarket wasn't far, only about a 5-minute drive, yet those 5 minutes felt unusually long. Finally, the familiar, massive 24-hour supermarket sign appeared ahead, standing out starkly in the darkness, like a small lighthouse. Strangely, the parking lot at the entrance was empty, with only a handful of cars parked there, which matched our expectation that there wouldn't be many people, though it still felt a little too few, making it seem as if most people either hadn't woken up yet or hadn't dared to come out. Michael muttered a comment under his breath as I parked the car, and we exchanged a glance, seeing the same tension and a hint of relief in each other's eyes. "Let's go. Quick in and out," I said as I pushed open the car door. The rain was still falling lightly, pattering against the umbrella as we walked quickly toward the supermarket entrance. The automatic doors sensed our approach and slid open soundlessly, releasing bright light and warm air conditioning and the moment we stepped inside, it felt as though we had suddenly crossed from an unnaturally cold and silent world into an overly bright, even slightly noisy alternate space. The intense lighting and constant temperature air left us dazed for a moment, almost making it feel as though the darkness outside that swallowed everything had been an illusion. Yet, when I glanced back through the huge glass wall, outside was still that terrifying, utterly motionless sea of inky black. There were only a few customers inside the supermarket, and those present all pushed their carts hurriedly, their faces carrying varying degrees of tension and gravity, as they silently piled goods into their carts, with almost no interaction between them. The store's broadcast system still played cheerful music, which at this moment sounded strangely out of place and unsettling. "Let's get a cart first," Michael said quietly, his usual lively tone gone. We grabbed the largest shopping cart and began sweeping up supplies with clear purpose, heading straight for the food section. The bread shelves were already nearly half empty, and we loaded all the remaining whole wheat bread and toast into the cart. At the milk refrigerators, I deliberately chose boxed milk with longer shelf lives and loaded 2 crates of vegetables and fruit. Pushing the cart into the fresh produce area, I selected hearty items that would keep well: potatoes, onions, carrots, pumpkins, apples, and oranges. And we worked quickly and in silence, choosing only those that looked firm and suitable for storage, soon filling a corner of the cart. "Water," Michael reminded me, and we turned toward the beverage section. Although the 5 cases of bottled water we had bought the night before were still stacked at home, seeing the scene outside made the urge to stockpile more essential supplies impossible to suppress, and we loaded another 8 cases of bottled water, stacking them heavily on the lower rack of the cart, until it nearly buckled. After a moment's thought, I had Michael haul over 2 large 5-liter barrels of water and place them on top of the cart. "Should we get some lighting stuff too?" Michael asked anxiously, glancing at his phone, which was down to 60% battery. He was right. If this abnormal situation continued, a power outage was entirely possible, so we headed to the appliance section. There were several types of flashlights on the shelves, and we picked 2 high-brightness models advertised as long-lasting, along with several packs of spare batteries. The power bank shelf was already noticeably emptier, but we were lucky enough to find 2 high-capacity ones and grabbed them immediately, even adding 2 rechargeable LED energy-saving lamps and some candles. Remembering necessities from my hometown, I found white candles in the daily necessities section, with only 3 bundles left, and put them all into the cart. As we pushed the overloaded, creaking cart past the medicine section, Michael stopped and hesitated, asking whether we should buy some medicine and whether we already had any at home. After mentally checking our medicine box and confirming we had the usual cold, fever, anti-inflammatory, stomach, bandages, and disinfectant supplies, I still paused as my eyes swept the shelves, then decided to grab a few bottles of multivitamins, just in case we ran out of fresh vegetables, along with several tubes of vitamin C effervescent tablets. As we were about to leave, rows of small seed packets on a nearby shelf caught my eye: vegetable seeds for bok choy, lettuce, radishes, even cherry tomatoes, and a deeper, longer-term unease seized me, because what if this darkness didn't last just a day or 2? "Get some," I said, barely hesitating as I grabbed several different packets of vegetable seeds and tossed them on top of the supplies in the cart. A gesture that looked a little absurd, but in this situation carried a desperate sense of planning ahead. We headed for the checkout, where a young cashier with a slightly pale face silently and efficiently scanned our mountain of goods, especially the large quantities of water and lighting equipment, a flash of understanding and barely concealed tension passing through her eyes. The other 2 or 3 groups in line all had carts filled with large amounts of food, water, and batteries as well. The total came to a shocking amount, and I swiped my card almost mechanically. "Sis, you stay here and watch the stuff. I'll drive the car over to the entrance to load," Michael said decisively, as he looked at the massive pile of supplies. I nodded and stood guard by the cart as he took the keys and jogged into the darkness outside. Standing just inside the brightly lit entrance, I watched as his figure was quickly swallowed by the darkness beyond the glass doors, until only distant headlights appeared and slowly approached. Soon, the car stopped at the entrance, and with the help of a supermarket security guard who was called over, the 3 of us made several trips before finally stuffing everything, especially the 8 cases of water, and the 2 large barrels into the trunk and back seat. When we got back into the car and closed the doors, the space felt cramped with supplies, and neither of us spoke right away, only staring out at the still pitch-black world and the supermarket's solitary lights. I took a deep breath and started the car, but the unease in my heart didn't lessen with the abundance of supplies. Instead, it grew heavier because of what we had seen on the way and the silent panic inside the supermarket. We made trip after trip through the quiet stairwell and that oppressive darkness, and by the 3rd run, I was already gasping for breath with a sore back, while Michael, young and strong, handled most of the water, beads of sweat appearing on his forehead and darkening a patch on the back of his t-shirt. When the last item was finally brought inside, I closed the door behind us with a click as the lock engaged, as if only then had we truly sealed off that abnormal world outside. I slid down against the door in exhaustion, sitting on the floor, as the cool tiles seeped through my thin lounge pants, my chest heaving from the exertion, and sweat dripping from my temples. My phone screen lit up, showing the time as 8:07 a.m. Michael was just as worn out, grabbing the half bottle of mineral water left from the night before and chugging it down in one go, his Adam's apple bobbing violently. I looked at the piles of supplies stacked in the entryway and living room, especially the mountain of bottled water and the heaps of long-lasting food and lighting equipment beside it, and an overwhelming sense of unreality washed over me. Gasping for breath, my voice a little unsteady, I said that maybe we had gone a bit overboard, and that this looked like enough to last a month, and even the vegetable seeds now looked particularly conspicuous under the indoor lighting, as if silently mocking some kind of excessive reaction. Michael set down the bottle and wiped his mouth with his sleeve, about to say something, when almost simultaneously, from some unknown floor below, a woman's sharp scream suddenly rang out, filled with incredulous terror. Oh my God, why is it still dark? As if that scream had set off a chain reaction, similar cries erupted one after another from our building and then from the neighboring one, from the few windows with lights on, some indistinct, but all carrying panic and collapse that pierced through the rain and glass to strike our ears. What the hell is going on? This is crazy. What time is it already? Honey, look. Something's wrong. This is really wrong. The voices weren't loud, but they were like icy needles that instantly punctured my earlier dazed thought of whether we had overreacted. I sprang to my feet and rushed to the living room window, pulling aside a corner of the curtain to look outside, only to see that same dense, light-devouring blackness that refused to dissolve. It was 8 in the morning, a time that should have been bright with sunlight and bustling traffic, yet it was as dead and silent as the deepest midnight, with only the sharp sound of rain and the faint, distant honks of 1 or 2 cars proving that time itself had not stopped. My heart sank completely as the last shred of hope was crushed. Turning to face the room full of supplies, I said clearly, despite my dry throat, that it wasn't an exaggeration at all, not even a little. The scattered screams gradually died down, perhaps soothed by family members, or perhaps sinking into deeper fear and silence. But this brief quiet was even more unsettling than the earlier noise. After a moment of shock and weakness, a practical sense of urgency drove us into action, starting with organizing the supplies. I took a deep breath, stood up from the floor, and got to work. We unpacked everything, carefully wiping dry the potatoes, onions, pumpkins, apples, and oranges that didn't need refrigeration, to remove any rainwater before placing them in a cool, ventilated storage room, while bread and some snacks were stored there as well. The 8 cases of bottled water and 2 5-liter barrels were stacked into a small wall in the corner of the living room, an oddly reassuring sight. Flashlights, batteries, energy-saving lamps, and candles were all placed together in a prominent, easy-to-reach compartment of the TV cabinet. Milk, yogurt, and the few leafy greens that required refrigeration were packed into the fridge, and seeing it filled brought me no sense of satisfaction, only worry at the thought of a possible power outage. "I'll charge everything that can be charged," Michael said, already moving faster than I was, having dug out every power bank in the house and plugged in our phones, tablets, my laptop, and even his game controller, filling every available power strip until tiny charging indicator lights glowed and flickered like preparation for some unknown long campaign. By the time we finished all this, it felt as though another century had passed, yet the darkness outside the window remained thick and unmoving. The time on my phone showed it was already past 9:40 a.m., and we collapsed onto the sofa, neither of us mentioning breakfast, our stomachs feeling heavy and completely without appetite. The sound of rain outside had grown louder at some point. No longer the gentle patter from before, but a clear, continuous roar pounding against the windows and the awnings below. More distinct than the rain, however, were the growing, increasingly chaotic voices of people, which had started as scattered cries and now snowballed together from all directions. Windows in the building across from us lit up one by one, more and more silhouettes appearing, as shouts, discussions, and even faint arguments pierced through the rain and became clearly audible. Where's property management? What on earth is going on? Call the police, hurry up. Damn it, there's no signal on my phone. It's not no signal, the calls won't go through. Even 110 is busy. Don't be afraid, sweetheart, mommy's here. Dad, look, the residents group chat has exploded. Everyone's gone crazy. The voices were filled with panic, confusion, anger, and disbelief, as more and more people woke from sleep or shook off their earlier wishful thinking that it was just bad weather. There was no weather phenomenon, not even the most extreme rainstorm, that could keep the sky in such absolute, all-devouring darkness at nearly 10 in the morning during summer. Even the most oblivious person realized by now that something catastrophic had happened, that something terrifying, far beyond their understanding and comprehension, was unfolding. Mikhail and I sat on the sofa without speaking, quietly listening to the intensifying rain and the rising clamor of voices, while the darkness outside remained boundless. Just as the waves of panic outside were growing so loud they nearly drowned out the rain, my phone rang again, and my mother's anxious face jumped onto the screen. The call almost instantly answered, as her voice, clearly shaken, called out my name. Her sobbing, trembling voice came through, with Dad's urgent talking audible in the background, along with the faint sounds of dogs barking and people shouting from the village. How are things over there? Is it still dark? The village is completely in chaos too. It's pitch black. Even the chickens are crowing. The dogs are barking like they've gone mad. Aunt Minnie and the others are shouting in the streets saying heaven is angry. Mom's words came fast and rushed, clearly terrified. Mom, don't panic. Slow down. I quickly steadied my voice, even though my own palms were slick with sweat. It's the same here. It's still dark. Are you and Dad okay? The screen shook slightly as Dad's face squeezed into view. His brows knotted tightly, his expression more severe than I had ever seen before. We're fine. We have food at home. It's just that this damn weather is too eerie. The whole village has exploded with panic. No one's ever seen anything like this before. Xiaoshu, Xiaolin, how are things on your end? Should your mom and I drive over now? It's only 3 hours. The family should stay together. No. Michael and I shouted in unison, so loudly that it startled our parents on the other end. Dad, absolutely not. I spoke rapidly in my anxiety. Look at how heavy the rain is outside, and how dark it is. You can't see the road at all. Who knows if there'll be more extreme weather on the way? What if the highway is closed, or something happens and you get stuck? It's far too dangerous. Michael leaned into the camera and shouted as well. That's right, Dad. Listen to my sister. Don't go out. We're very safe here. All the doors and windows are locked. We stocked up yesterday and this morning. Food, water, everything. Enough for a month or two. You stay at home and don't go anywhere. Wait until it gets light. Dad opened his mouth as if to say something more, but after looking at our anxious faces and then at the equally pitch-black, chaotic village outside his window, he finally let out a heavy sigh, and his shoulders slumped. What a mess this is, he muttered. Mom's voice came back, calmer, but still full of worry. Then you two make sure the doors are locked. Don't open them for anyone. As long as you have enough to eat, it's fine. We still have rice, flour, vegetables at home, and some left in the fields. Enough for your dad and me for a while. Hearing that my parents still had supplies at home, the taut string in my chest loosened just a little. At least, they wouldn't starve anytime soon. Mom, Dad, don't worry. We're really fine. Please don't go out. It's raining hard and you'll catch a chill. Just stay at home. Maybe it'll get light soon. I forced my tone to sound optimistic, even though I didn't believe it myself. After repeating our warnings for several more minutes to make sure they gave up the idea of going out, we finally hung up the call, still full of worry. The moment the call ended, the room was once again filled with the sound of rain outside, and the faint, chaotic noises of distant voices. Michael and I exchanged a look, both seeing fear and relief reflected in each other's eyes. Good thing we stopped Dad. He let out a long breath and collapsed back onto the sofa. Yeah, I nodded, my heart still racing, my hands turning cold at the thought of our parents driving through that bizarre weather. At least for now, they were safe and had food. That fragile reassurance, knowing our loved ones were temporarily okay, wrapped our fear-soaked hearts in a thin layer of warmth. We sat in silence on the couch, listening to the relentless chaos outside, knowing this was only the beginning, and the real test might still be ahead. But at least for this moment, we and our parents far away still had a corner of shelter in this unsettling dark world. The first day passed in a state of widespread panic and speculation, yet with nothing truly happening. Anxiety hung over the neighborhood, but the electricity was still on, the water hadn't stopped, and although the internet cut in and out, messages could still occasionally load. The residents' group chat was in complete chaos, full of guesses, fear, and even absurd rumors. Someone had mustered the courage to go to the 24-hour convenience store at the complex entrance, and came back saying some items had been panic bought, but the store was still open, the owner trembling as he guarded it. Prices unchanged. That news eased people a little, and some residents ventured out, in raincoats with flashlights, to restock what they could. That night, we forced ourselves to eat something, but neither of us slept deeply. The rain never stopped, and the darkness never receded, only the occasional muffled crying or argument breaking the silence before being swallowed again by the rain. Lying in bed, with my eyes closed, I clung to a faint, stubborn hope. Sleep it off. Just sleep it off. And tomorrow morning, everything would return to normal. Sunlight would pierce the darkness, and all of this would be nothing more than a collective nightmare. I woke up the second day from the cold. Before my mind fully cleared, a bone-deep chill had already seeped in, the blanket suddenly feeling too thin as goosebumps rose on my exposed arms. I snapped my eyes open to the same pitch-black darkness, with only my phone screen glowing faintly on the nightstand, showing a time past 7 in the morning. Hope burst like a balloon pricked by a needle. It wasn't a dream. None of this was a dream. The sky was still dark. Before despair could fully spread, the cold hit again, heavy and damp, nothing like air conditioning. I reached for the remote, pressed it, and nothing happened. There was a power outage. My heart tightened as I sat up immediately, groped for the flashlight by my pillow, and clicked it on, a beam cutting through the darkness around the bed. I hurried to the wardrobe, pulled out long-sleeved loungewear and pants meant for autumn, the fabric sending shivers across my skin as I dressed, then added thick socks before feeling slightly warmer. Holding the flashlight, I carefully opened the bedroom door to find the living room just as dark, the beam sweeping over stacked supplies and cold furniture, the air filled with a chilling stillness. Almost at the same time, the door to the next room creaked open and Michael appeared, rubbing his eyes and turning on his phone's flashlight, his face pale in the glow. "Sis," his voice was hoarse from sleep, trembling more from shock and cold. "Don't you think it's freezing? Is the power out?" He was still wearing a short-sleeved pajama top, goosebumps clearly raised on his arms. "Yeah." My voice was heavy as I shone the light toward the wall of bottled water. "The temperature's dropped a lot. Go put on thicker clothes." Realizing this wasn't normal, he froze for a second before rushing back into his room, drawers clattering. I moved to the window and pulled back the curtain slightly to reveal the same suffocating darkness and rain outside, lighter but colder, thin needles of water falling relentlessly. The chill wasn't just from the temperature, but from the dead, hopeless darkness of the second day. I instinctively looked toward the complex entrance, hoping to see the comforting glow of the convenience store, but there was nothing. The entire area swallowed by blackness, every shop sign extinguished, indistinguishable from the background. "The convenience store's closed," Michael said quietly beside me, disappointment lacing his certainty, and it wasn't a question. In these conditions, who would dare open, and who would dare venture out for supplies that were likely already gone? The streets were completely empty. Even the faint engine noises heard occasionally the night before had vanished. Just then, my phone vibrated sharply in my hand, startling me in the extreme silence. The screen lit up with several new messages, the signal flickering weakly at 1 or 2 bars. It was an emergency notice from the company's internal system. Due to extreme abnormal weather, all employees were to work from home effective immediately, with resumption pending further notice, and everyone was urged to ensure personal safety and minimize outings. Almost simultaneously, Michael's phone lit up as well. He glanced at it and said softly that the school had issued a notice too, suspending all classes and requiring students to report their location and health status. After reporting that he was with me and safe, we put our phones down and stared once more into the all-consuming darkness outside. The company notice and school shutdown shattered the illusion that things would soon return to normal. This wasn't a brief anomaly, but a prolonged crisis, requiring isolation and waiting without knowing how long it would last. We sank back onto the sofa, wrapped tightly in our clothes, and my brother murmured, "Sis, are we going to be stuck here for a long time?" I didn't answer, only hugged my arms tighter as the dead blackness outside remained unchanged, as if eternal. Days blurred into a numbing loop. Every night before sleep, I clung to a faint, barely believable hope that maybe tomorrow morning I'd wake to daylight, even a dim gray dawn, but every morning brought the same thick, hopeless darkness. Time lost meaning. Clocks still ticked, but the numbers felt hollow. Thankfully, the tap water hadn't stopped, and we used it sparingly, leaving the bottled water untouched as a final reserve. By the fourth day, the phone signal became extremely unstable, eventually unable to load any new information. The last messages in the residence group frozen on mutual encouragement and baseless speculation before falling silent. On the fifth day, I woke as usual and reached for my phone, only to see a cold, unmoving cross where the signal bars should be. "Michael," I whispered, waking him on the sofa and showing him the screen. No signal. He bolted upright, checked his phone, rebooted it, and still saw no service. The last fragile connection to the outside world was gone. Physically, we were safe with food, but something colder than darkness and chill crept in silently. By the 8th day, the temperature stabilized at a cool level that long sleeves and thick socks could handle. The rain continuing relentlessly. Not torrential, but unending, hammering at the windows and the world, fraying nerves. At least, without the summer heat, we didn't need air conditioning during the outage. I tried to find something positive to say, though my voice sounded dry in the quiet room. Michael merely nodded, expressionless. Our supplies were more than sufficient, sparing us the worst survival anxiety, but the psychological pressure grew daily. Other residents were clearly worse off. Lights that once flickered with candles or flashlights dwindled each day. On the 4th day, officials in raincoats had briefly gone door to door, handing out small amounts of compressed biscuits and bottled water, telling people to stay calm and wait for rescue. A momentary spark of hope that was quickly extinguished by endless darkness and rain. By the 6th or 7th day, some people couldn't sit still anymore. We heard engines starting below, saw weak headlights cut through the dark as cars crept toward the gate, only to return hours later empty-handed, engines dying into silence. No one brought anything back, and we had no idea what the outside world had become, or why everyone returned with nothing. Those who came back kept silent, or perhaps their silence itself was a bone-chilling answer. What we possessed was exactly what others were running out of, or even risking their lives to fight over, and this realization was like a cold stone pressing heavily against my chest. On the afternoon of the 11th day, just as Michael and I were watering the seeds we had planted in flower pots, the sudden cry of, "Hey, what are you doing? Robbing people? Help!" tore sharply through the rain-soaked silence outside the window. It was a woman's voice, shrill and piercing, filled with extreme terror and despair, coming from the building opposite us, seemingly from the first floor. Michael and I jumped up as if electrocuted and rushed to the living room window, our hearts pounding so hard they felt ready to burst out of our chests. Relying only on sound and extremely blurred outlines, we judged that it was the first-floor apartment across the way, Grandma Nina's home, the gentle elderly woman who lived alone, with her children working far away. "Get lost, you old hag," a rough male voice shouted, accompanied by the sound of things smashing and the old woman's painful whimpers. "Is this all the ration you have? Is there any more?" Another, slightly younger male voice urged impatiently, his tone filled with anxiety and irritation. The sounds of rummaging, pulling, The old woman's weak, broken sobbing and pleading blended together. "Please, leave me a little, that's my last food." "Enough nonsense. Let go if you don't want to die." There was a violent struggle and a dull thud, like a body hitting the floor, and the old woman's crying turned into pained groans. After a brief silence came hurried footsteps and the rustling of plastic bags, as they had clearly found what they wanted. "Move, hurry," the rougher man urged, as the footsteps reached the doorway and paused briefly. Then the younger man's voice sounded again, much lower now, carrying an indescribably complex emotion that seemed like justification, self-consolation, and even a faint, barely perceptible tremor. "I'm sorry, Grandma Nina. My child is barely over 1 year old. There's really nothing left to eat. He cries until we can't take it." The next second, the footsteps fled in panic, quickly swallowed by the rain and darkness. The first floor across the way fell into a deathly silence, broken only by Grandma Nina's faint, intermittent sobbing, as if she might stop breathing at any moment. Michael and I stood frozen by the window, our bodies icy cold, our blood seemingly frozen solid. A robbery for food had happened less than 100 meters from us, and the man's final words had torn apart the last illusion of warmth beneath this apocalyptic darkness. Hunger and the instinct to survive could crush human nature with terrifying ease, and even a lingering trace of compassion could not stop catastrophe from erupting. The fragile calm was completely shattered, and fear took on a new, concrete, hideous form. That brief robbery at Grandma Nina's home was like a bucket of ice water, dousing the last bit of hope and luck in the complex. The scattered complaints, discussions, and even arguments that could once be faintly heard vanished completely. The occasional flashlight beams or candlelight seen through some windows became even rarer and shorter-lived, as if everyone had learned how to hide themselves better in the darkness. Days drifted by slowly in an extreme quiet and depression. We had food and water and were temporarily safe, yet a heavy, suffocating emotion spread relentlessly through my chest. On the 13th day, the rain outside continued tirelessly, as if it had never stopped over the past dozen days, and the monotonous, constant drumming had almost become background noise, numbing the senses. But then, a new sound joined in, shouting. Many people shouting from downstairs, mixed into the rain, panicked and chaotic. Mikkel and I immediately became alert and silently moved to the living room window, carefully lifting a corner of the thick curtain as we had done countless times before, holding our breath as we looked down. Windows on several floors below that should have been pitch black now flickered with faint light from flashlights or candles, the beams moving chaotically and casting frantic shadows of people running inside. The voices grew clearer. "Quick, use basins to scoop it out, block it. Stuff towels into the door cracks. Oh my God, where is the water coming from?" This wasn't the sharp conflict and screams of robbery, but a more widespread, desperate, and clumsy panic. Water was flooding in. The continuous torrential rain of over 10 days had clearly overwhelmed the complex's drainage system, and backflow or seepage through every possible gap had finally caused large-scale flooding in the lower floors, especially the first floor, and possibly parts of the second. Although we lived on the 13th floor, and the ground beneath us remained dry. Listening to the rising cries, sobs, and futile splashing below filled us with a sense of shared dread and deeper anxiety. People were desperately throwing water out with whatever containers they could find, but it was clearly useless as the rain continued mercilessly, seeping and accumulating. "It's over. My place is completely flooded," a man wailed hoarsely somewhere below, full of despair, with a child's crying mixed in. We silently let the curtain fall and stepped back into the center of the room, instinctively glancing at our dry floor. Feeling relief, followed immediately by heavier unease. How long would this rain last? And when would this darkness end? "Sis?" Michael's voice sounded tense in the dim light. "If the water keeps rising like this, will the people on the lower floors start coming up?" The question hit my heart like a chunk of ice. Property management had been completely out of contact for days, and the building was now effectively unorganized. So for residents whose homes were flooding, the only way to survive was to move upward, which meant reaching our floor or even higher. At that moment, a strange sound of wet footsteps mixed with the dragging of heavy objects came faintly from the direction of the fire escape, dull and chaotic, clearly more than one person struggling upward. Michael and I froze instantly, and almost at the same time he reached out and switched off the LED energy-saving lamp. We held our breath, our hearts pounding, ears straining as the sounds grew clearer, several people panting heavily, splashing through water, a child's suppressed crying, and an elderly person's constant groaning. "Which floor is this?" a horseman asked breathlessly. 12. 12th floor. Let's rest a bit. Mom can't walk anymore," the woman replied tearfully. "We can't stop in the stairwell. Find an empty place," another, more impatient man urged. The footsteps and dragging sounds stopped just outside our door, separated from us by only one door. "They're right outside," Michael whispered. This floor seems to have residents," the hoarse voice said quietly, though it was still painfully clear in the silence. He seemed to be examining our security door. "Sounds like a woman," another voice said uncertainly. "Should we knock and ask?" The first man hesitated. "Ask? What?" the impatient man snapped immediately, his voice edged with ferocity born of despair. "Who has spare space or food now? It's every man for himself. Keep moving up." After a heavy silence filled only with labored breathing and a child's soft sobbing, the footsteps resumed, slow and heavy, moving upward toward the stairs leading to the rooftop. Michelle and I remained frozen in place for a long time, only daring to exhale silently once the sounds completely disappeared. They had given up knocking on our door, but what about next time? On the 21st day, as Michael and I gnawed on dry bread, a sudden, restrained yet unmistakable knocking sharply broke the silence. We moved at the same time, silently slipping to the wall by the entryway, holding our breath as my trembling finger lit up the video doorbell screen. The faint glow revealed the couple who lived downstairs, newly married not long ago, the man named Adam and the woman named Layla, people we used to nod to in the elevator, and who once complimented my dress with a smile. Now they stood outside the door, their faces pale and haggard under the screen's light, eye sockets sunken, lips cracked, Adam wearing a filthy outdoor jacket, his eyes full of agitation and impatience, while Layla clutched his arm tightly, her face filled with fear and pleading. Both of them were soaked through, hair plastered to their foreheads, pants and shoes caked with mud, clearly having struggled up from the flooded lower floors, their state even worse and more desperate than the family we had encountered earlier. "Is anyone there?" Adam's hoarse, urgent voice came through the door, stripped of all politeness. "Open the door. We know someone's inside. We saw light here before," he said. Layla sobbed softly, begging, "Please, just let us come in for a bit to hide from the rain. Downstairs is unbearable. The water is freezing. We only need a little space. We won't take much." Adam cut her off impatiently and banged on the door harder, his voice rising sharply with near-collapse rage. "Open up. Did you hear me? We're neighbors. Don't just watch us die. We just want some water, or don't blame me for being rough." The threat sliced through the last trace of sympathy, rising in my heart. Grandma Nina's robber's words still echoed in my ears, and before hunger and despair, neighborly bonds were thinner than paper. Michael silently moved closer to me, his body taut, and we stared at the two distorted, anxious faces on the screen, listening as the knocking nearly turned into pounding, and Layla's suppressed sobbing continued. We couldn't open the door, because once it opened, no one knew what would happen. We bit our lips hard, barely daring to breathe, standing motionless as Adam kicked the door violently and cursed before dragging the nearly collapsing Layla away. The calm lasted only 2 days. On the 23rd day, as we were counting our remaining supplies, a violent, frenzied crash, not knocking, but pounding with fists or possibly some object, slammed against the door, ripping through the corridor's dead silence. When the doorbell screen lit up, my blood nearly froze, because outside weren't just Adam and Layla, but also the family that had fled toward the rooftop earlier. The horseman, the tearful woman, the elderly person, and even the child. They were all crammed at the door, faces ashen, eyes sunken, gazes filled with extreme hunger, exhaustion, and a madness born of desperation. Adam stood at the front, face twisted with agitation, speaking loudly to the others, his words clearly carrying through the door, as he claimed he had seen us carrying boxes of bottled water and bags of rice, insisting we had plenty of food, and that there was only a woman living inside. The lie inflamed them, and when the others began pleading and shouting, talking about starving children and demanding food. Adam kicked the door again and yelled for us to hand everything over, threatening violence if we refused. Just as panic overwhelmed me and I realized they truly believed him and were about to force their way in, Michael suddenly roared, "Who said there's only one person inside?" His voice shook with fear and fury, but carried undeniable authority, and all the noise outside stopped dead, plunging both sides of the door into absolute silence. Adam's expression froze instantly, a flicker of panic and uncertainty flashing through his eyes as he abruptly turned his head to exchange a look with the hoarse-voiced man, the two of them communicating rapidly through their gazes, filled with suspicion and calculation, because they had no idea how many people were inside the apartment, or what weapons we might have, and the courage they had just mustered, through sheer numbers and bluster, deflated like a balloon pierced by a needle. After a tense standoff that dragged on for more than 10 long seconds, Adam shot a vicious glare at the door, as if wanting to spit out a threat, but he didn't dare raise his voice, only muttering a low curse before signaling to the others, and soon the sound of footsteps rose, messy and unwilling, slowly retreating from the door and moving once again toward the stairwell. Michael and I pressed ourselves tightly against the door until the very last trace of footsteps vanished, only then daring to let out the breath we had been holding for so long, our bodies giving way as we slid down along the door panel and collapsed onto the floor, cold sweat already soaking through our clothes. They had retreated, for now, but because of Adam's instigation and lies, we had become a target of covetous eyes in the minds of even more people, and Michael's presence had also been exposed, which meant that if they came again next time, they likely wouldn't be so easily sent away. Over the next few days, a suffocating and false calm enveloped the 13th floor, but things below were far from peaceful, as the continuous rainfall caused the standing water to slowly and inexorably spread up to the 2nd floor. Whenever we occasionally peeked downward through a gap in the curtains, we could see panic beginning to appear in some of the 2nd floor windows as well, with moving points of light and the faint sounds of water being thrown out. The stairwell was no longer safe, and we began to frequently hear wet, exhausted footsteps moving upward, sometimes accompanied by suppressed coughing and whispered voices, as residents on the lower floors were being forced to abandon their homes and migrate upward to higher ground. By the 26th day, despair and hunger had clearly worn away most people's reason and restraint. With a loud bang, even crazier and more unrestrained than before, violent smashing against the door erupted suddenly, no longer done with bare hands but with hard objects, possibly clubs or even a fire axe, the tremendous impacts making the security door shudder as if it would be broken open at any second. Michael and I went deathly pale, almost springing off the floor as we lunged toward the video doorbell, and when the screen lit up, the scene outside made us suck in a sharp breath. It was still Adam's group, but they looked even more disheveled and crazed than before, with Adam gripping a red fire axe in his hand. Layla slumped in a corner with hollow eyes as if she had already resigned herself to fate, while the man from the other family held an iron rod, his face twisted into hysterical ferocity. The elderly person and the child were nowhere to be seen. Whether they hadn't come up or something else had happened, we didn't know. But what was even more terrifying was that they weren't the only ones there. The huge noise of smashing and Adam's hoarse incitement had clearly drawn in other neighbors who had just fled upward or had already been hiding on higher floors. And though the doorbell's field of view was limited, we could still see 3 or 4 unfamiliar faces, men and women alike, all twisted by hunger and desperation, standing behind Adam and staring at our door with gazes filled with greed, hesitation, and fear. "This is the place," Adam roared as he slammed the back of the axe against the door and turned to shout at the people behind him. His voice cracked and hoarse as he brazenly lied that a single woman lived inside with a young man, that we had stockpiled mountains of food and water, that he had seen it with his own eyes, with bottled water stacked like walls, and rice, flour, and oil enough to last a year. He exaggerated wildly, portraying us as cold-blooded, selfish villains, hoarding riches while others starved, shouting that there was no reason we should monopolize everything, and demanding we open the door and hand it over. The crowd was stirred up. Hesitation and fear crushed beneath the instinct to survive. Scattered accusations quickly merging into a unified chorus of malice. with some people joining in the shouting and even stepping forward to help kick the door, while faint, sobbing pleas to share just a little were quickly drowned out by louder roars. We became the target of every arrow, all the despair and rage being directed by Adam straight at our door. And under the violent impacts, the security door let out painful groans, the lock area even beginning to deform slightly. Michael's eyes were bloodshot as he grabbed a baseball bat and was about to rush forward. But I held onto him with all my strength, knowing that opening the door with so many people outside armed with weapons would be a dead end. Yet Adam continued roaring that if we didn't open up, they would smash it open. Just at that critical moment, an extremely abrupt yet crystal clear amplified electronic announcement pierced through the chaos and deathly silence from below, growing closer as it clearly moved upward. All residents, please take note. All residents, please take note. We are a joint emergency command and local police task force. We are now distributing emergency supplies. Please remain calm. Stay indoors. Do not panic. We are official personnel distributing emergency supplies. The voice was clear and steady, carrying a long-lost sense of order and authority belonging to civilized society, and Mikhail and I froze, hardly daring to believe our ears as we instinctively moved back to the video doorbell screen. The chaos outside had vanished, replaced by the sight of more than a dozen figures ascending the stairs to our floor, all wearing uniform rain ponchos, with 2 police officers at the front, faces stern and alert, hands resting on their equipment, followed by several community workers carrying cardboard boxes filled with individually packaged food and bottled water, and others behind them holding thick blankets. Their appearance was like a powerful beam of light, suddenly piercing through the heavy darkness and chaos, while Adam, Layla, and the others who had been smashing the door were now being sternly guarded by 2 police officers in a corner of the corridor, faces ashen and bodies trembling, all their earlier arrogance completely gone. The horseman tried to argue, but was shut down by a sharp command from the police, while Layla sobbed quietly. And as a community worker knocked on the neighboring door, another noticed the fresh dents on our door and the discarded fire axe on the floor, his expression changing as he hurried over. After cautiously glancing at Adam and the others under guard, he addressed our door in a calm but clear voice, greeting us as residents, telling us that the troublemakers had been dealt with, that it was safe now, and that they were there to distribute emergency supplies, his gaze settling on the camera, as he knew we were watching. Michael looked at me, his eyes filled with questioning and incredulous excitement, and after taking a deep breath and nodding, he carefully opened the door, revealing the tired but gentle face of the worker through the crack, as he reassured us that things were under control, and handed in compressed biscuits, bottled water, and a thick gray blanket. Michael's voice broke as he thanked them, while the worker told us firmly to hold on, explaining that this was a rare polar night combined with extreme rainfall, that meteorological departments were monitoring it closely, the highest emergency response had been activated, relief supplies were on the way, and the situation was expected to be brought under control soon, urging everyone to trust the authorities, maintain order, avoid panic, rumors, and extreme actions. Those words steadied our frayed nerves like a calming pill, and soon after, the supplies were distributed. The police escorted Adam's group downstairs, and the workers continued upward, leaving the corridor quiet once more, with only the fire axe on the floor, and the dents in the door proving that it hadn't all been a nightmare. We closed and locked the door, leaning against it as we stared at the cold compressed biscuits and blanket in our hands, overwhelmed by an intense sense of unreality, because the authorities had arrived, bringing order, supplies, and hope. "It'll get better soon," Michael murmured, repeating the words as a faint light finally ignited in his eyes. In the days following the official intervention, the atmosphere in the complex subtly changed, and although darkness and cold persisted, and lower-floor residents still crowded stairwells and upper corridors, the sense of impending collapse eased noticeably, as people knew order still existed, and rescue efforts were underway, even minimal distribution and enforcement enough to rekindle a fragile spark of hope. Adam's group being taken away served as a powerful deterrent, and after enduring another 4 difficult days, on the 30th day, Michael was lying on the sofa, idly flipping through a magazine he had already read countless times, when he suddenly sat bolt upright, rubbed his eyes hard, and pointed at the window in disbelief, his mouth opening without a sound. I followed his gaze and felt my heart skip a beat, because the thick, undiluted blackness that had lasted for 30 full days was fading. Not as an illusion, but slowly and visibly thinning into a deep gray, like ink being gradually diluted. The wall clock pointed steadily to 5 in the morning, and outside the window it was no longer night, but the dim brightness that comes before dawn after a storm. Gloomy and sunless, but undeniably light. "Sis, it's light," Michael finally found his voice, choked with sobbing joy as he rushed to the window, pressing his face close to the glass, while I struggled up and joined him, greedily staring at the long-lost daylight as tears streamed down my face. 2 days later, the power was restored. Signals became intermittent but usable. Water pumps roared back to life. Municipal drainage trucks entered the complex. Water levels dropped, and the murky floodwaters receded to reveal the mud and debris-covered streets beneath, as daily life slowly and painfully resumed. That day, Michael and I went to a nearby large supermarket that had reopened to buy fresh food, finding it crowded but orderly, everyone wearing tired yet hopeful smiles. And for once, Michael didn't pounce on the snacks, only rubbing his stomach and saying that seeing chips made him nauseous, and that he wanted vegetables and my braised pork instead. We bought fresh vegetables, meat, fruit, and some things our parents liked, and as we returned downstairs loaded with bags, a familiar car pulled up in front of us, dusty and mud-splattered from the road. Our parents stepped out, exhaustion from the long journey written on their faces, but the moment they saw us, it all transformed into overwhelming relief and joy, as Mom ran over crying and wrapped us in a fierce hug. Dad's eyes red as he patted Michael's back and pulled me into his arms as well. They explained that once the signal partially returned and they couldn't reach us, they couldn't wait any longer and had driven straight over, despite the unknown road conditions. The trunk packed with rice, flour, oil, cured meat, pickled vegetables, and even a large barrel of clean drinking water. Together, we carried everything upstairs, and as Mom tied on an apron and went straight into the kitchen while I helped wash and cut vegetables, listening to her chatter about the journey and her worries, Dad and Michal organized the supplies, and soon, the long-missed aroma of home-cooked food filled the kitchen. At dinner, our family finally sat together around the table, and as the city outside slowly returned to life, inside the window, our family was finally reunited.